Well, hello and welcome to another edition of FVTV. And we're having a Grandmasters chat. And to do that, we need to have our Grandmaster of Freemasons Victoria, Most Worshipful Brother, Richard Elkington. Hello, Richard. Welcome.
Hello, Ash. Glad to be back. We've had a few weeks off with Easter and interstate trips and whatever. So,
well, it's time to roll
There's plenty to talk about.
There certainly is. There's time to roll up our sleeves. There's work to do. People are back at lodges. They're enjoying it thoroughly. And there's a lot on the plate. So this will be a bit of an extended version of our usual chats. The great advantage for people is they can fast forward if they want to. Because we're going to be covering things like...
Or they can stop after 20 seconds.
Yes. The interesting thing from a media point of view is your videos have got a great retention rate. People stay on. More than half of your viewers stay for the entire journey. And we're going to be talking today about communications. We're going to be talking about the Grand Installation in South Australia, from which you just returned. We're going to be talking about the Royal Children's Hospital appeal, in which Freemasons. We'll be talking about Grand Masters and Grand Secretaries around Australia and young people. We'll be talking about Works Committee initiatives right around the state of Victoria, lodge installations, there's change committees to discuss, and that's as well as a tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh, our late brother, Prince Philip. So I guess we better get on with it.
I guess we had.
Richard, you're just back from South Australia. Tell us about the grand installation there. You drove?
I drove to South Australia because I guess my concern is, like other people from interstate, if a government goes into panic mode and closes the borders, then if I was flying, I'd be quarantining for 14 days potentially. So to make sure I could get back in that situation, I drove.
Now, you got into Adelaide, I think, on the Thursday or Friday, and there was lots to do.
Well, there was a discussion amongst the Grand Masters and deputies on Thursday night, where we shared some of the initiatives that are taking place in each state. A lot of positivity about recruitment, actually, right across Australia. We're all experiencing large numbers of young men, particularly, seeking to join. So there's a great deal of positivity across the nation on the future of the institution. On the Friday, we had a visit to Government House, a vice-regal reception.
Isn't that great? Eh? That's lovely.
Isn't that great? And then which is an acknowledgement by, I guess, the governor of South Australia that Freemasons is an important institution. It certainly is. It certainly is in the context of South Australia when you look at who some of their past Grand Masters have been. So it's really part of the fabric of the society in South Australia. There was a meet and greet on Friday night, which is an opportunity for all visiting delegations and many of the South Australian brethren just to get together and have a chat. And there's a couple of speeches. And then on Saturday, there was a meeting of Deputy Grand Masters. On the Saturday morning, there was always some sort of ladies' breakfast or high tea on Saturday morning as well. And then there's the grand installation on Saturday afternoon, which was interesting from a number of perspectives. Firstly, the Grand Master's father, the incoming Grand Master's father, was there, and he's in his mid-90s. Now, how often would you see a Grand Master's father be present at the installation of a Grand Master? Almost never. So that was a sort of a strong touch of sentiment. There was the other thing that was observable, and a number of us remarked on this, was the large number of young Grand Officers. Stood out, actually, which leads me to the thought that I think we've got to actually take positive steps to make sure that younger people populate the leadership of this organisation. So we need to hand over to our younger group to create not only a contemporary fraternity, but one that actually meets the needs of the future because it's in their hands.
It's interesting, Richard, because even in our own lodge, in my own lodge, we were looking at the lists of people involved in just normal ritual work, month-to-month ritual work, and it began to become the same old names. And someone said, well, look, why don't we bring in a few of our younger guys? They can fill, they're eager to do it, and encourage those guys. They can be mentored by the older members, but they still can play a role, but to encourage our younger members to take a more active role.
Absolutely. So the grand installation was interesting in itself. It was done under under social distancing conditions, so there weren't all that many Freemasons in the hall. So it was held in the Grand Hall of the Freemasons South Australia building in North Terrace in Adelaide. Partners were situated at the, mezzanine level. And then following the grand installation itself, the other highlight of the grand installation ceremony was a master mason who was a cushion bearer, got up and gave a charge to the entire audience, which was it was flawless. Ex-Victorian, I might add. But those sorts of things stand out when people have the courage to get up and give a long charge and do it flawlessly. It makes us feel good, it makes them feel good. So that was particularly outstanding. And then, of course, we had the banquet on Saturday night, which was held at the Adelaide Oval. So wow. The background was to the lit, illuminated surface of the Adelaide Oval, which was a great backdrop, actually. And then on Sunday we then had a church service, which I think is the last of the jurisdictions to have a church service.
Yes.
I must admit I like them because I like listening to the sermon. And I've got a copy of it, by the way, Ash. I'm sure you'd like to read it.
Thank you.
It'll probably do you some good.
Noted.
and then we had a Grand Masters dinner on Sunday night where we talked about, Grand Masters conference, and the Grand Secretary's conference followed that. And the sorts of things we were talking about really was our appetite to do some things collectively.
So that's all the different states coming together.
Looking at what things we can do more efficiently doing it together. So what's the options for shared services? What are some of the initiatives we could take by doing things together? For example, maybe a branded project that would be identified nationally with. So membership initiatives, there'll be some, there's intended to be a national membership initiative taken. So we share information amongst the jurisdictions. So that will take place later this year. And then the Grand Secretaries also had a conference talking about issues such as honorary grand rank, credit cards, that sort of thing. So it was a very useful weekend for the sharing of information.
So back to Victoria and down to business. As soon as you got home, you had to get in the car again and off to Ballarat.
Yeah, well, Ballarat Yarrawee installation was last night. And I must admit, I've been to quite a few lodge meetings in the last 3 weeks. And what's been outstanding about nearly all of the meetings, including last night, was a large number of entered apprentices, fellow crafts and master masons of a young age. I went to Old Scotch Collegians. I can't remember how long when it was now, must be 2 or 3 weeks. And, I walked in and there was almost a sea of young guys on my left, seated in the north. Last night, there was, I think it was 5 entered apprentices who were sort of waiting to be, to return to the ceremony. Hosts of fellow crafts. These are all new members of the lodge. And so I know, I suspect, but I haven't gone around and rung up or asked specifically for data on this, but I suspect our attendances overall may well be down because of continuing fears about COVID, but certainly the number of young people participating and attending, but not only just being there, but showing some real enthusiasm for the fraternity. It's astonishing. And of course, last night, I also presented a 75-year jewel to Right Worshipful Brother Bill Messer, who was made a past Deputy Grand Master, would you believe, in 1983.
Wow.
75 years. And what I really enjoy about presenting jewels, which I think is one of the main things I should do, is to ask them to explain in their own words what Freemasonry meant to them and what messages they have for that same array of young people just starting their Masonic journey. What are you, Bill or George? What advice do you have for, after 75 years in this institution, what advice do you have for those young people? And some of the answers are astonishing, really, about how valuable the institution is.
Richard, in talking about our institution, we look at our week-to-week, month-to-month activities, and the Masonic Governing Council keeps meeting. What's happening there?
Well, we've approved a number of things. There's going to be some changes in the short term. This is before we start looking at some of the fundamental issues of governance and our organisation, and whether we move to a commercial board arrangement. There's going to be some steps taken to empower the Works Committee to be more nimble, to be making quicker decisions, and to apply some remedial action to some property improvements, which, quite frankly, have been hanging around for too long. And so we're going to be making a conscious effort as an organisation to attend to some of the very real maintenance issues associated with Masonic centres.
Well, I guess one of the realities is that in 2020, the handbrake was on, and for a time, members couldn't even visit the lodge building or Masonic centres to inspect what they needed to see.
Yep. So Freemasons Victoria has, as many would know, has made some further investments in accommodation at the Eastbourne, at Freemasons East Melbourne, in terms of a new layout, greater room for office space, meeting rooms, boardrooms, training rooms. And in association with that, there's been a commitment by both the Finance Committee, by the Works Committee, and by the board to attending to some of the very real maintenance needs of many of our Masonic centres. As my friends at Omeo would say, it's about bloody time, really. But as you know, but they've been waiting for, I think, 2 or 3 years for issues to do with painting the Masonic Centre.
Yeah, sure.
And we've got plenty of these examples across Victoria where
Richard, what else is happening at the Governing Council?
Well, we've been discussing a number of initiatives. We oversight, of course, the change program of the organisation.
How's that going?
It's the best way to prescribe it. It's very measured, and so I'm sure that we'll hear in the short term from either Stephen or Gary Sebo or both about the progress in that space. Chairs have now been selected for the various subcommittees. Those subcommittees have been populated with interested volunteers.
There's something like 45 different
something
members.
like that, different people.
And there's lots of newer, fresher names in there.
Absolutely correct.
The same old players.
Well, the same old players, and usually based on rank.
Yep.
Because as you know, ask yourself, when you become a grand officer, it immediately confers upon you wisdom and experience and knowledge, doesn't it?
Well, I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for that parcel.
So yeah, look, there's a whole host of subcommittees looking at issues like grand rank, rapprochement, legal and constitutional committee essentially handling the constitutional change, governance. You know, Miles King is heading up a governance committee. Sort of social media. There's a whole range of activities being pursued by the change committee, and I guess it's a bit of a balancing act here. There are some of us who are impatient for the change, and that probably includes you and me. and there are those who.
In the same breath, we have to be measured, don't we?
Well, I think we do, because some of our members are probably concerned that change is happening too quickly.
Yeah.
And so it's getting this balancing act between changing but bringing the membership with us along the various phases of the project. And as we all know, and we've been talking about for some time, the intent is to have some constitutional type discussions on the 30th of May. So it still hasn't been planned in detail, but we've reserved the date. We know the subjects we're going to be talking about, how that change committee will be managing that process with the governing council. So,
Richard, on that point, we're looking at big change, but we're also looking at the day-to-day, the week-to-week, the month-to-month. And we still have to do budgets for coming years. We still have to look in very tight financial circumstances about how we operate. And you've called a meeting in the first weekend of May, which VAT leaders and other organisation leaders will attend to talk about budget, and we'll be having that at Freemasons Bayside.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
There's a number of issues here, Ash. The first is to make sure that what volunteer action teams and the organisation itself is doing aligns with the strategic plan. We actually have one, and it's been substantively, we're on track to achieve a lot of the things we set out to do back in 2017. And so whatever we do has got to be aligned with that. Secondly, I think our members want to know what their organisation is doing to make life in their lodge interesting. You and I have reflected, gee, there was only 800 members voted in the vote, the electronic vote that occurred on the 17th of March. Why is there only 800? And I think that the reality is that for most members, their interest in Freemasonry is their lodge.
Yes, indeed.
And their lodge experience is the important thing for them. And so what goes on at Grand Lodge and the politics of Grand Lodge is of really only marginal interest to the majority of our members. And we've got to remember that.
Well, I think so you used the word only with 800 votes. In a member institution, a vote of 10% is quite large.
Well, absolutely. I remember when I was on the executive council of VECI, there used to be a member survey go out on a regular basis to ascertain business sentiment and business conditions. And I think from memory, if they got a 3% return, they were doing well.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And so sort of getting back to where the organisational leaders fit in, and so we're having a workshop on the 1st of May where we'll discuss what firstly is the plan for the next financial year, how that does align with the strategic plan, and what the budget bit is. So this is what we want to do, and this is what we believe it's going to cost. And this is the resources we'll need to implement the plan. So it's not just about the, another plan to put on the shelf. It's about getting on with it.
Yeah.
And there's a strong desire to get on with stuff, actually.
Well, speaking of getting on with stuff, you've asked for a couple of more volunteer action teams to be formed.
Absolutely. These were approved by the board last year. That was one to do with harmony. We have a large number of musicians in our organisation. We have a grand director of music, we've got a grand organist, we've got a grand herald, looking after the trumpeters.
Yeah.
And there's a whole, and is that all we do? We just have heralds and trumpeters turn up, and heralds and organists turn up at installations and quarterlies. Is that the beginning and ending of the role of music in our organisation? And so I've put together a VAC which looks at the long-term interests of this organisation in the musical space. So what are the other things we could do as an organisation? How do we attend to the future needs musically of the organisation? Many of our musicians are, probably wishing to retire. How do we actually replace them, and in what form? How do we give proper recognition to, alongside ceremonial officers, to musicians as members of the ceremonial team? And so we set up a VAT to deal with those sorts of issues. Then we have a welfare and compassion VAT. So this is intended to bring together the almoner, the chaplains, and some support services around the organisation. Some of the chaplains were said to me, for example, oh, it's just turning up and saying a prayer at a quarterly, or saying a prayer at a lodge installation, or giving the occasional address at a reconsecration. At the beginning and end of this, we actually thought it was more to do with pastoral care, as is the role of the Grand Almoner. So how do we give effect organisationally to that sort of sentiment? We all know, for example, very valuable resources like Ted Stevens, who offered free of charge a counselling service to members and their families. The thought underpinning all that was, how do we actually set up a resource pool within the organisation so that we can look after the interests of our members? Isn't that why we exist as lodges, to actually do that? But what are the resources we can tap into? So it's sort of giving effect to some of that. We'll also be advertising in the very near future, which will segue to another topic, I suspect, the reformation of the History and Heritage Committee, which was essentially disbanded 3 or 4 years ago. And so this is looking at sort of the museum and library type concepts.
Well, this ties in with your thoughts for a Masonic Centre of Excellence and Museum, doesn't it?
It does. Ian Buckingham, who's the Grand Superintendent of Education, Masonic Learning, and his deputy, Brendan Kine, put a paper to the Governing Council about a month ago to establish a Masonic Centre of Excellence. Big words, probably doesn't mean much to most people, but really the bottom line was really re-establishing the History and Heritage Subcommittee, giving effect to the notion of a Masonic museum where artefacts can be properly archived, stored and displayed, and also revisiting the whole issue of a library. Look, there's mixed views on all this. Some would argue that a library where books are stored is old hat. Why don't you just scan everything and put it online? Well, I can understand that view. There's also a view that perhaps we ought to have a library where we store our important documents, and we can our members can have access to it. Yes. And maybe you do it in association with others. For example, it's been suggested that maybe we could have a museum of fraternal organisations, not just Freemasons, but also gardeners and Oddfellows. They've got nowhere to store their stuff, I understand. Yeah, sure. And perhaps we could have a library in association with another library. So there's there's all sorts of options here, but it's actually getting to the centre of excellence concept, because we don't have, other than sort of distributed at various Masonic centres, some examples of our very real, really valuable furnishings and regalia and jewels. So,
Richard, you spoke about the possibility of even engaging with another library, which brings to mind our place in the community.
mm-hmm.
And one of the recent high-profile activities in the community was the collection for the Royal Children's Hospital Good Friday appeal, and that's in association with the Uncle Bob's Club. And you started early in the morning and you finished just about midnight. Tell us what your day involved.
Well, I wish I'd started the day earlier, actually, because there are collectors all over the place. And I think in a whole day from 10:30 until about 4 in the afternoon, we only visited really basically the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. So, there was some really enthusiastic Freemasons at collecting points, which were predominantly APCO and 7-Eleven outlets. And 7-Eleven, is that the right name?
7-Eleven convenience stores and the APCO
convenience stores, yeah, convenience, yeah. And so there was a really enthusiastic collectors there. The numbers of attendees at those stores was well down, I understand. But I know it's about, in many ways, getting the brand out there. But our brand, once again, was seen to be associated with a very worthy community project. And whilst we search around as an institution and we do at lodge level, well, what can we as a lodge become associated with? Well, what can Freemasons Victoria become associated with? And so we are in association with Uncle Bob's, who exist basically solely to raise money for the Royal Children's Hospital. We work with them. Our brand is out there, and we're working as volunteers to raise money for a very worthy and long-standing charity in Victoria. It was a great exercise, actually.
Richard, communications-wise in the community, you've been encouraging of a number of initiatives that have started to take place now that we're in the COVID recovery phase.
Mm-hmm.
And we've started pages in local community newspapers. We've got a recruitment campaign also running simultaneously with that. We're looking now to get into community radio. This week we've recruited Philip Bateman, an entered apprentice from Lodge Devotion.
Oh, he did that fantastic video at a lodge meeting.
Yes, and Philip is looking now to find ways to mentor lodges on how they can do that in a similar way, how they can make their own videos and get them out into the community. And he has joined our communications and marketing volunteer action team. So there's lots of communications improvements or projects underway
Mm-hmm.
with your encouragement, and thank you for that. But there are other things happening in the community too. And in northwest Victoria, Mildura way, there's some initiatives taking place.
Well, there is, and I think we've spoken previously about a pilot geo-specific Facebook-based recruitment campaign that has been piloted at Wangaratta. We're now to move. Freemasonry generally, that is craft, mark and chapter, has been very concerned about our future, in strategic areas like the northwest of Victoria. There's no mark any longer in Mildura, for example. And so there's a major initiative going to take place in that area between the chapter installation, which I think is middle of May, through until early July, when we have the United Memorial and Mabine installation. So there's a major concentrated effort being put into running open days, running a geo-specific marketing exercise, having market, chapter and craft engage in joint activities. I think the Italian lodges, that is Galileo in Sydney, Garibaldi Melbourne, and Garibaldi, and Leonardo da Vinci, meeting in Mildura on the weekend. I think it's Labor Day weekend. So all that, so there'll be a whole range of concentrated membership-based activity.
That might be Queen's birthday weekend, is it?
Oh, sorry, Queen's birthday, Labor Day.
Yes.
Why,
Yes.
why would I think of Labor Day, Ash?
Well, 8 hours work, 8 hours play, 8 hours.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
up the workers.
Queen's birthday weekend. So it's a trial, monitored very closely by the membership vet. I know Paul Brennan's already spent. He travelled back to Gippsland via Mildura just to talk with the locals. We want this to be not something that people from Melbourne fly in, give some gratuitous advice and then leave.
Yes.
We're looking for local ownership and management and driving of this particular.
Well, speaking of local, there's been plenty of lodge installations taking place. The Grand Lodge ceremonial team calendar looks very busy. So does your calendar. You've been everywhere.
And loving it, actually. Because the level of enthusiasm is terrific. It's infectious. You talked about Phil Bateman earlier. I mean, the reality is, amongst our 7,000, how many members we've got? 7,600 at the moment on the increase. We've got a lot of talent, a lot of expertise.
I mean, just Phil, for example, he runs a firm called Bravo Charlie. It looks at promoting stakeholder relations in a number of organisations.
Exactly.
And it was a hidden treasure, and Phil put his hand up. And we should be asking more questions about, especially for talented young Freemasons, of please come in. You're most welcome.
Absolutely. And it goes to show often your most talented and skilled and enthusiastic people are in your own backyard. Yeah. Except maybe they didn't want to get involved historically. The Grand Lodge wasn't viewed particularly positively. I think that's fair to say. And so the more we can actually utilise, the more you're agreeing with that.
Well, I was just thinking there are some Freemasons who have been around for 40 years or so just waiting to be asked.
That's probably where you've been for 40 years, exactly.
Yes.
And so the more we can utilise, not in a heavy way, but in some reasonable way, the skills and talents of our members, the better off we will all be.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of, and we'll be going through some governance discussions sort of later in the year, but it's we've got to always remember the volunteer action teams are just that, they're volunteers.
Yes.
So we need on the management side, that's where these communications, marketing and property, and the finance, that's where the management is. It's not in the volunteer action team. They're advisors, isn't it right, Ash? You're a great advisor, aren't you?
Something like that. Richard, we have put together a mega chat today, but before we go, a tribute to our late brother, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Prince Philip, and you were very quick to be able to assemble a letter that went to the private secretary of Her Majesty the Queen, and that letter has been forwarded.
Yes, I was. There's a period of reflection, actually. And I recall seeing Prince Philip at the Maui railway station, the Maui railway station. It must have been about 1957 or 1958. I remember him being on a train and waving to the people that were. I was standing on the overpass. Used to have over railway lines.
Yes.
I was standing on the upward step and I was waving. So was my dad. We were waving to Prince Philip, and it's only, it's only comparatively recent years I discovered that he was a Freemason. But I guess we get, those of us, when you get to our age, Ash, you're much younger than me, of course.
Of course, of course.
You start to look back and you say, what are the circumstances which formed me as an individual? In many ways, we had the stability. We had the stability, and we have had since basically, I was born of the same monarch, the same stability of the same leadership, and Prince Philip's brother, Philip's death, sort of reminds us of how we've all developed as a society, reminds us of many ways of our values, and reminds us of participation in the Second World War, which was, we can look back on it as those who didn't participate, as a tumultuous event, but it was world-wrenching,
Yes.
and we don't, in many ways, I sort of don't understand the impact it had on people like my grandparents,
Yes.
my own parents. And so that's what the passing of Prince Philip means to me. It's sort of the closing of an era. And we need to think and plan for a change of monarch, I think. What do we do if the Queen suddenly passes away and we have a king? Just the logistics of changing portraits in lodges is going to be a big enough exercise. Yes. Apart from a whole series of remembrances. So.
Richard, you have been mightily generous with your time today. It's a record breaker. I think we're close to the 40-minute mark. We better let people go and do their other business as well. But we're going to be back soon with another video on some more matters, because I've only got through half of your list.
That's right.
Richard, thanks for your time. We've enjoyed your company. We've been speaking with the Grand Master of Freemasons Victoria, Most Worshipful Brother Richard Elkington.